If you stay alive long enough and pay half a mind to how people behave, you start to notice a recurring pattern. Humanity doesn't make quiet, modest, middle-of-the-road mistakes. We specialize in gigantic, history-bending, crowd-driven blunders. And when these episodes occur, they look as if some spell has overtaken the population. People abandon reason, abandon humility, abandon common sense. They act as though the laws of gravity have been temporarily suspended. In reality, nothing magical is happening. It's simply the Lollapalooza effect in action, the moment when several psychological forces, incentives, pressures, and stories all align and push people in the same direction, creating outcomes so extreme they almost don't seem real. One bias alone won't cause a mania. One sweet-talking authority figure won't cause a collapse. One incentive won't corrupt an entire system. But combine enough of them, let them reinforce each other, and suddenly you have runaway behavior. Social proof tells you everyone else is doing it. Incentives reward the worst decisions. Authority figures shout confidently from stages. Commitment traps people into defending irrational positions. Envy drives them to chase whatever their neighbor is chasing. Stories feed their imagination until they can no longer distinguish between dreams and arithmetic. Layer these forces together, and you've built the psychological equivalent of a nuclear reactor, powerful, volatile, and capable of overheating the moment the crowd stops thinking. Human beings evolved to imitate the tribe. When everyone runs, you run. When everyone buys, you buy. When everyone praises something, you assume it must be good. And this instinct worked fine when survival was the goal. But in modern markets and modern society, that instinct can lead you straight off a cliff. The pressure not to fall behind, not to miss out, not to be the lone dissenter. It's unbelievably strong. Once a crowd gains momentum, it becomes a force of nature. Add incentives to that mix, and the problem multiplies. Incentives shape human behavior more reliably than almost anything else. People do what they're rewarded to do, and when those rewards grow large enough, they push aside ethics, caution, and judgment. Mortgage brokers approve bad loans. Analysts hype terrible investments. Employees bend rules. Executives massage earnings. Regulators look the other way. And they all tell themselves they're doing the right thing because the money is so good it must mean the behavior is justified. That's how institutions rot. Then there's authority, which hijacks our judgment. Someone on television speaks confidently about a new era in technology, and people take it as gospel. A billionaire tweets something cryptic, and entire markets move. A CEO proclaims a grand future, and investors accept it as destiny. People surrender their thinking to the nearest loud or credentialed voice. Authority bias might be the most dangerous of all the psychological tendencies because it allows nonsense to spread rapidly under the illusion of expertise. Add commitment, and the trap tightens. Once someone puts their identity into an investment or a belief, their mind refuses to let go. They defend the sinking ship. They reinterpret new information to confirm their earlier decision. They become the last person to abandon the hype because doing so feels like admitting they were incompetent. Humans cling to mistakes far longer than they cling to truths. And of course, envy, the great accelerator of stupidity. Nothing motivates the human animal like watching someone else get rich quickly. It doesn't matter whether the wealth is sustainable or deserved. It only matters that someone else has it and you don't. Envy drives people into decisions they would never make in a calm state of mind. Envy dissolves logic. Envy turns crowds into stampedes. Tie all these forces together with a seductive narrative, the promise of a new technological revolution, the dream of instant wealth, the myth of permanent prosperity, and you have everything required for a full-blown Lollapalooza. People stop analyzing. They start fantasizing. They confuse possibility with inevitability, imagination with proof. This is exactly what happened during the dot-com bubble. The internet was real, but people treated it like magic. Companies with no profits skyrocketed in valuation. Analysts declared that profits no longer mattered, teenagers became paper millionaires, and anyone who raised concerns was labeled old-fashioned. But the truth is simple. Reality never abandons its post. Eventually, the numbers didn't add up, and trillions evaporated. The technology survived. The stupidity did not. We are seeing a similar pattern today with artificial intelligence. Now, let me be perfectly clear. AI is one of the most powerful technological shifts of our lifetime. I'm not dismissing the technology, but human psychology doesn't care whether the technology is real or imaginary. It only cares whether the story is exciting. Right now, you have companies doubling their value because they added the letters AI to a press release. You have startups with no revenue raising billions. You have investors who have never written a line of code declaring that AI will replace entire industries. You have consultants, influencers, executives, and venture capitalists all singing the same tune because the incentives for hype are enormous. Everyone wants to be early. Everyone wants to be right. Everyone wants to be the genius who saw the future before the rest of the world. And in the process, they stop asking fundamental questions. Which business models actually capture value? Which companies have real moats? Which applications solve meaningful problems? When a mania forms, arithmetic gets replaced by storytelling. That's how bubbles form, not because the underlying idea is wrong, but because the human mind cannot resist the temptation to inflate the idea beyond all proportions. And once arithmetic gets replaced by storytelling, you enter a very dangerous psychological zone. People no longer want data, they want drama. They don't want cash flows, they want visions. They don't want steady, boring businesses, they want rocket ships. And the market, being a reflection of human nature, happily gives them what they crave. Suddenly, every company claims to be part of the next revolution. Every founder describes their startup as world-changing. Every press release reads like a prophecy. The language shifts from business to mythology. You start hearing phrases like inevitable dominance, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, massive TAM, network effects, and winner takes all. These words are powerful because they are vague, and the human mind loves vagueness when it aligns with greed. Once a crowd convinces itself that a glorious future is guaranteed, the present no longer matters. A business with no revenue becomes early stage. A company burning cash becomes investing in growth. A startup with no customers becomes pre-monetization. These euphemisms act like anesthetics. They numb the pain of reality. People are willing to ignore absurd valuations because the narrative tells them it's justified. They believe tomorrow's potential is worth any price today. And once that mindset takes hold, you can throw every sensible metric into the trash bin. This is where you start hearing the most dangerous sentence in financial history. This time is different. People said it about railroads. They said it about radio. They said it about airlines. They said it about Japanese stocks in the 1,980 seconds. They said it about dot-com companies in the 1,990 seconds. They're saying it today about AI, crypto, space startups, and a dozen other shiny ideas. And every time, the cycle ends the same way. Eventually, the story reaches an emotional peak. Excitement outruns reality. Competition erodes margins. Costs rise. Execution falters. And the results fail to justify the fantasy. Then the selling begins. Slowly at first, then all at once. And the same crowd that chased the dream suddenly becomes the crowd that rushes for the exit. The irony is that very few people think they are part of the mania while it's happening. They believe they're the rational ones. They believe they've done independent research. They believe they're early adopters who just get it. But the truth is that most people caught in a bubble are simply following social proof while convincing themselves they're being contrarian. They're not analyzing the world. They're echoing the world. Their confidence isn't derived from understanding. It's derived from watching others express the same enthusiasm. And when confidence is borrowed instead of earned, it disappears the moment the crowd turns. What people forget is that every mania contains a seed of truth. The internet was transformative. Railroads were transformative. AI is transformative. But transformation does not mean that every participant succeeds. It means the opposite. A transformative technology attracts intense competition, and competition destroys all but a tiny sliver of the players. For every Amazon, you get a graveyard of pets.com style failures. For every successful AI company that'll exist 20 years from now, there will be thousands of startups that raised too much money, hired too aggressively, scaled too fast, and discovered too late that they had no durable advantage. But during a mania, nobody wants to hear that. Optimism becomes a social requirement. Doubt becomes unforgivable. And this is how people set themselves on fire financially. Not by misunderstanding the technology, but by misunderstanding human nature. They forget that crowds amplify stupidity faster than they amplify intelligence. They forget that markets overreact in both directions. They forget that fear and greed are stronger than spreadsheets. And they forget that the future, no matter how bright, has to be earned, not assumed. When everyone is dreaming, the sober thinker looks strange. When everyone is partying, the person whispering, "Be careful," sounds pessimistic. But history sides with the cautious more often than it sides with the euphoric. In every bubble, the winners are the few who maintain discipline while the crowd abandons it. They ask the boring questions. What does this company actually do? Where does the profit come from? Is there a moat that competitors can't cross? Does the valuation make sense in any universe governed by math? These questions feel tedious when everyone else is shouting about revolutions, but they're the only questions that save you when the music stops. Because in the end, every mania ends the same way. Arithmetic comes back into the room like an old, humorless accountant who doesn't care about your dreams, your feelings, or your narratives. It cares only about revenues, expenses, and competitive dynamics. And when that old accountant opens the books, the illusions vanish instantly. The companies that were built on smoke collapse, the stories unravel, and reality reclaims the territory that fantasy borrowed. And that's why you must stay vigilant. The moment the crowd starts chanting in unison, the moment the world tells you that thinking isn't necessary, the moment narratives replace numbers, that's when you should sharpen your skepticism. Because the crowd never warns you before it stampedes. It only tramples whoever wasn't quick enough to step aside. But Lollapalooza effects don't only appear in markets. They appear in politics, in social movements, in advertising, in corporate cultures. Look at Wells Fargo opening fake accounts because employees were pressured relentlessly to meet quotas. Look at the housing bubble, where millions participated in a delusion about ever-rising home prices. Look at tulip mania, where flowers became objects of national obsession. When enough psychological levers are pulled simultaneously, crowds behave like heat-seeking missiles aimed directly at their own destruction. But it's important to understand that Lollapalooza effects aren't always engines of destruction. The same psychological forces that can push a society off a cliff can also lift it to extraordinary heights. Human beings are capable of collective brilliance just as easily as collective folly. When the right incentives, the right stories, and the right leadership align, progress accelerates so dramatically that future generations look back in disbelief that things were ever different. Take the simple act of brushing your teeth. 100 years ago, most Americans didn't do it daily. Dental hygiene was an afterthought. Then you had public health campaigns, persuasive advertising, respected authority figures endorsing good habits, and parents passing those habits to their children. Suddenly, brushing your teeth went from uncommon to universal. You had a positive Lollapalooza built out of social proof, incentives for health, fear of disease, and a narrative of personal responsibility. Teeth got healthier, lives improved, and the world moved forward because enough psychological levers pushed in the same constructive direction. The same thing happened with seatbelts. At first, nobody wanted to wear them. They felt restrictive. People insisted they were safe enough without them. Then governments enforced regulations. Car companies redesigned interiors. Insurance companies adjusted premiums. Doctors shared grim statistics. And movies began portraying car crashes more realistically. Eventually, society embraced the habit. What started as resistance turned into widespread acceptance. A positive Lollapalooza saved millions of lives simply because incentives and psychology aligned. Look at smoking. For decades, cigarettes were glamorous. Doctors endorsed them. Movies celebrated them. People used them to signal sophistication. Then, science caught up. Data became undeniable. Governments raised taxes. Public health campaigns hammered the risks. Social norms shifted. Smokers became the minority. That shift wasn't gradual or accidental. It was a coordinated psychological and economic push that produced one of the greatest health improvements in modern history. Positive Lollapaloozas show that humans aren't doomed to stupidity. We have the capacity for breathtaking progress when the forces shaping our decisions point upward instead of downward. But you don't get the benefit of these positive effects unless you recognize them. And you don't avoid the destructive ones unless you train yourself to see the earliest warning signs. Which brings us to the most important question of all. How does a person protect themselves from the destructive Lollapaloozas that inevitably arise in markets, media, politics, and daily life? The first step is something most people never practice: slowing down. The crowd moves fast because the crowd is emotional. You must learn to pause. A short pause, even a few seconds, disrupts the automatic imitation that drives herd behavior. When you pause, you create space for thought, and thought is the antidote to mania. The second step is asking what incentives are driving the behavior you're observing. Incentives explain everything. When someone is pushing you toward enthusiasm, ask how they benefit. When a company promises the moon, ask who gets paid if you believe it. When a group insists you must join them or be left behind, ask what pressure they're under. Once you understand the incentives, the behavior stops being mysterious. And once it stops being mysterious, it stops being seductive. Then you must study history. People who don't understand past manias are vulnerable to every future one. If you know the script, the excitement, the storytelling, the denial, the euphoria, the collapse, you recognize it sooner. Manias look new on the outside, but identical on the inside. Railroads, radio, dot-coms, crypto, AI. The technology changes, but the psychology does not. If you want to protect yourself, study the patterns. They repeat like clockwork. Another powerful defense is developing the habit of inversion. Instead of asking, how do I profit from this excitement? Ask, how do I avoid being a casualty of it? Instead of asking, which stock could double? Ask, which behaviors could wipe me out? Humans want to chase opportunity, but survival is the real goal. If you avoid the big mistakes, the ones that destroy reputations, savings, relationships, life becomes much easier. Not spectacular, maybe, but stable. And stability is underrated in a world addicted to drama. You must also learn to tolerate being the odd one out. In every bubble, the rational person feels foolish. Everyone else is celebrating. Everyone else is getting rich. Everyone else insists the future is certain. Meanwhile, you sit quietly, scratching your head, refusing to participate. That discomfort, that feeling of being out of sync with the crowd, is the price of staying rational. If you can't stomach that price, the market will eventually extract a far higher one from you. And lastly, cultivate skepticism, not cynicism, but skepticism. Skepticism asks for evidence. Skepticism examines foundations, not headlines. Skepticism checks the arithmetic. Skepticism wonders what happens if the story fails. In a mania, skepticism becomes a scarce commodity, and therefore a valuable one. It won't make you popular. It may not make you rich quickly, but it will keep you safe when the crowd goes blind. Protecting yourself isn't a technique, it's a mindset, a habit of independent thought, a willingness to look foolish in the short run to avoid ruin in the long run. If you can think while others imitate, and pause while others rush, and question while others cheer, you gain an enormous advantage. Because destructive Lollapaloozas will always exist. But you don't have to be destroyed by them. You can step aside. You can stay rational. You can keep your head while the crowd loses theirs. And if you remember nothing else, remember this. The biggest disasters in human history come from multiple forces, acting together, not one. When you see hype, incentives, fear, greed, experts shouting, crowds cheering, and prices disconnecting from reality, stop, observe, think. It's not supposed to be easy. Anyone who thinks it's easy is stupid. But the world makes far more sense when you use multiple mental models instead of relying on a single one. The Lollapalooza Effect is your map for understanding extremes. The booms, the busts, the manias, the frauds, the breakthroughs, the revolutions. Use it well, and you will avoid most of the stupidity that ruins people's lives. And if you can stay rational in an irrational world, that alone becomes a kind of genius.